What happens when a sequence of events, spread across just 8 days, accidentally exposes the blueprint for ending dollar dominance? Not speeches, not treaties, not press conferences, but real systems being deployed. From December 9th through December 17th, 2025, for events unfolded that Washington desperately hoped would go unnoticed. They didn't fail because they were loud. They failed because they were quiet. While markets were distracted by rate cuts, elections, and headlines, an alternative financial architecture was being wired together in real time. Ethiopia launched payment rails that bypassed the dollar system entirely. Indonesia negotiated trade outside Western currency clearing. India assumed leadership of BRICS with a mandate to build alternative infrastructure. And then came the moment that tied everything together. India's Prime Minister flew to Addis Ababa to hardwire African payment systems into the BRICS network. This was not diplomacy. This was financial warfare. You will hear dollar defenders say this is impossible, that BRICS cannot challenge the reserve currency system, that alternatives are decades away. But those arguments rely on one assumption, that nothing is already built. What happened in mid-December was not theory. It was deployment. I have been tracking payment digitalization through sources inside central banks and finance ministries across multiple continents. And what I saw during those 8 days was coordination, not coincidence. The financial architecture of the next 50 years did not begin with an announcement. It began with transactions. This channel exists because the mainstream narrative around BRICS is either dismissive or deliberately incomplete. Today, we are going to break down exactly what happened during those 8 days, why it matters far more than markets realize, and how a quiet shift in payment infrastructure is changing global power without firing a single shot. Because the end of dollar dominance will not be announced. It will be executed. Let's start where this shift actually began. December 9th, 2025. Addis Ababa. While Western financial media barely mentioned it, Ethiopia launched something far more important than a press release. It launched a national digital payment system designed to operate without the dollar. This was not a pilot program. This was not a concept. This was live financial infrastructure. Ethiopia unveiled its instant payment system as part of its national digital payment strategy for 2026 through 2030. On the surface, it looked technical, boring, easy to ignore. But buried inside the official strategy document was the real objective: cross-border transactions in local currencies, integration with BRICS payment systems, negotiation of bilateral currency swap agreements. Translated into plain English, Ethiopia was building the rails to trade without touching the dollar system at all. No SWIFT messaging, no New York clearing banks, no forced dollar conversion. And the scale matters. Mobile money accounts in Ethiopia exploded from just 12 million in 2020 to nearly 140 million by 2025. That means almost the entire adult population is already operating inside a digital payment ecosystem. This system now processes the equivalent of trillions in local currency every year. That is not experimentation. That is operational independence. Now here's the context that explains the urgency. Ethiopia defaulted on its Eurobond in 2023. Foreign exchange reserves collapsed to less than 1 month of import cover. Traditional dollar-based financing stopped working. So Ethiopia did what many countries are now quietly doing. It complied publicly with IMF programs, while privately building the infrastructure to escape dollar dependency long-term. This is what de-dollarization actually looks like. Not speeches, not headlines, payment rails. And here's the part that should make you pause. 7 days after Ethiopia turned this system on, India's Prime Minister landed in Addis Ababa. That timing was not accidental. Because Ethiopia didn't just build a payment system, it built a plug-in. One day after Ethiopia flipped the switch, something else happened that most people completely missed. December 10th, Moscow. Indonesia's president met with Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin. Official headlines talked about energy cooperation and diplomacy. But that's not what this meeting was really about. Because there was one question Western analysts refused to ask. What currency are they using? Russia has been locked out of dollar clearing since 2022. Indonesia is a full BRICS member with an explicit de-dollarization mandate. So when trade between these two countries surged 17% in just 9 months, it wasn't happening in dollars. It couldn't be. They are settling transactions through bilateral mechanisms using local currencies. Rubles, rupiah, yuan-linked clearing paths. This is not theory. This is live trade. And Putin's words during that meeting mattered. He explicitly thanked Indonesia for its BRICS membership. That was not protocol. That was acknowledgement. Indonesia brings two things to the table: a population of 280 million people, and control over some of the most important shipping routes in Southeast Asia. Russia brings experience in surviving sanctions, experience in building payment workarounds when SWIFT shuts the door. Together, they are stress testing a system that bypasses dollar infrastructure entirely. This is the part the West gets wrong. Sanctions were supposed to reinforce dollar dominance. Instead, they forced alternatives into existence. Russia didn't collapse. It adapted. And now those adaptation tools are being shared. Indonesia's meeting in Moscow wasn't symbolic. It was a live demonstration. Dollar-free trade is no longer a future concept. It is operational. And while Washington debates policy, these systems are already processing transactions the Federal Reserve never sees. No clearing fees, no conversion spreads, no financial choke points. And that brings us to the moment where coordination turns into architecture. Because while Indonesia proved the trade routes, India was about to connect the system. December 11th and 12th, Brasilia. Brazil officially handed the BRICS chairmanship to India. On the surface, it looked ceremonial. Speeches, flags, diplomatic language. But the real transfer was not symbolic. It was operational. Brazil spent its chairmanship laying the political groundwork. Now India is tasked with executing it. Let's decode what that actually means. Brazil's agenda focused on 3 pressure points: breaking IMF dominance in development finance, reducing Western control over climate funding, and challenging technological gatekeeping through AI and digital infrastructure. Those goals were political. India's approach is technical, and that difference matters. India takes over BRICS with 4 pillars: resilience, innovation, cooperation, sustainability. Resilience means insulation from sanctions. It means building parallel systems so exclusion has no leverage. Innovation means exporting technology that removes dependence on Western digital rails, payment systems, data centers, settlement layers. Cooperation means interoperability. Ethiopia's instant payment system talking to India's UPI, Russia's SBFS connecting with China's CIPS. Local systems forming a single network. Sustainability means financing development without dollar debt. Loans issued in local currencies through the new development bank. No IMF conditionality. No dollar choke points. And this is where India becomes the linchpin. India already runs the most successful non-dollar payment system on Earth. The Unified Payments Interface processed over 100 billion transactions in a single year. India delivered hundreds of billions in welfare payments without SWIFT, without correspondent banks, without dollars. They proved something critical. You don't need the dollar to run a modern economy. Now India is exporting that model, not through speeches, through infrastructure. And the timing tells you everything. Because 4 days later, India landed in Ethiopia, and that was not a coincidence. December 16th and 17th, Addis Ababa. India's Prime Minister arrived in Ethiopia, the first visit by an Indian leader in over 15 years. On paper, it was framed as a diplomatic milestone. In reality, it was a systems integration meeting. Because this visit happened exactly 7 days after Ethiopia launched its national instant payment system. 7 days. That timeline matters. This was not reactive diplomacy. This was pre-coordinated execution. During the visit, India committed to exporting its digital public infrastructure expertise, payment system interoperability, data center construction for Ethiopia's foreign ministry, replication of India's direct benefit payment architecture. This is not aid. This is architecture. Here's why it changes everything. Ethiopia trades heavily with China, Russia, the UAE, and other BRICS members. India trades with all of them. By connecting Ethiopia's instant payment system to India's UPI, something new becomes possible. African nations can settle trade with Asian economies directly, local currency to local currency. No dollar conversion, no New York clearing banks, no SWIFT messaging. At the same time, India backed Ethiopia's membership in the new development bank. The NDB already holds more than $40 billion across over 100 projects. But those loans are issued in local currencies. No dollar debt traps. No policy conditionality. This is how parallel systems are built. Quietly, technically, and faster than anyone expects. Ethiopia didn't announce a revolution. It deployed one. Indonesia proved the trade routes worked. India connected the technology. Russia contributed the sanction-tested playbook. And within 8 days, a functional alternative to dollar clearing went live. Not theoretical, operational. And every transaction that flows through this network is invisible to the Federal Reserve. That's not the end of dollar dominance, but it is the end of dollar inevitability. And that leads us to the final question. What happens when millions of transactions choose not to touch New York at all? December 9th through December 17th. 8 days. That's all it took for the illusion of dollar inevitability to crack. Not through a declaration, not through a summit announcement, but through transactions. Ethiopia built the rails. Indonesia proved the trade routes. India delivered the technology. And BRICS connected the system. This is how financial power actually shifts. Not with headlines, with infrastructure. The dollar isn't collapsing. That's the mistake people make. It's being bypassed. Every time a trade settles in rupees instead of dollars, the Federal Reserve loses visibility. Every time a payment clears without SWIFT, Western leverage weakens. Every time a country chooses local currency settlement, the system rewires itself a little more. And that's why this matters. Because dominance doesn't end when something stops working. It ends when it's no longer necessary. For decades, nations were told there was no alternative. No alternative to dollar clearing. No alternative to Western banks. No alternative to IMF conditions. Those 8 days proved otherwise. What BRICS built wasn't a replacement currency. It was optionality. And optionality is lethal to monopoly power. The United States still issues the world's reserve currency. But reserve status only matters if others are forced to use it. Now, they're not. And here's the part most people will miss. This transition won't show up as a crash. It will show up as erosion. Lower demand for treasuries. More volatile bond markets. Currency swings that no longer obey old rules. The dollar won't die loudly. It will fade quietly, transaction by transaction. The financial world just crossed a threshold. Payment systems became weapons more powerful than aircraft carriers. And the shift didn't happen in Washington. It happened in Addis Ababa. If you understand this now, you're early. If you wait for headlines, you'll be late. Because the dollar's decline won't be announced. It will be processed. Subscribe if you want to understand what comes next. Because this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning.
Let's zoom out and look at what actually just happened. This was not an announcement. It was not a treaty. And it was not a political speech. It was infrastructure. In just 8 days, BRICS nations quietly demonstrated that large-scale trade and payment systems can operate without touching the US dollar. Ethiopia built the payment rails. Indonesia proved the trade routes. India delivered the technology. And those systems were connected in real time. That is how financial power really shifts. Not through confrontation, not through headlines, but through transactions. The dollar is not collapsing, but it is no longer unavoidable. Every transaction settled outside the dollar weakens its monopoly. Every trade that bypasses Western clearing systems reduces leverage. And every local currency settlement removes a layer of control that once seemed permanent. This is why the shift feels invisible. There is no single breaking point, no dramatic crash, no moment where the news announces the end. Just millions of payments quietly choosing a different system. History shows that reserve currencies don't disappear overnight. They erode slowly, and then suddenly. First, alternatives appear. Then, infrastructure spreads. Then, usage becomes normal. And only at the very end does confidence finally break. What we are seeing now is that infrastructure phase. Once the systems exist, adoption becomes a choice. And once adoption becomes routine, dominance becomes optional. That is the real risk facing the dollar. Not rebellion, replacement. The global financial system is being rewired from the edges inward. Africa, Asia, emerging trade corridors, all connecting outside the traditional Western framework. The dollar will remain important, but it will no longer be unquestioned. And when a currency loses inevitability, it loses power. This shift will not be announced. It will be transacted. And the people who understand that before it's obvious won't be surprised when the world suddenly looks very different.